Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the exam with focused explanations and practical contexts. Emerging risks are risks that are new, previously unknown, or rapidly evolving within or outside the organization. In other words, these are risks that have not been fully understood or experienced before, making them difficult to predict or plan for. They often arise from technological disruption, geopolitical shifts, new regulatory mandates, or industry-wide innovation. Examples of emerging risks include the misuse of generative artificial intelligence, the threat posed by future quantum computing to encryption protocols, non-compliance with new environmental, social, and governance reporting standards, and the fast mutation of ransomware campaigns. These risks can be difficult to quantify due to their novelty, and they typically lack established control response. What makes them so complex is that they are often multidimensional, affecting legal, financial, technological, and reputational areas all at once. In the context of the CRISC exam, emerging risks will often appear in scenarios where traditional controls are missing, where the risk is not listed in the risk register, or where governance has not yet adapted. Recognizing these signs and thinking ahead is a skill exam questions are designed to test. Your ability to identify emerging risk, prioritize early recognition, and describe how to respond without overcommitting to uncertain paths is key to answering these questions correctly. Emerging risks tend to share several defining characteristics that make them challenging to manage with traditional risk tools. First, they are often marked by high uncertainty, both in terms of how likely they are to occur and how significant the impact might be. In other words, you may not be able to assign reliable probability scores or dollar value consequences. Second, emerging risks are typically not well understood because they lack historical data. This means there are no baselines, no trends, and no clear indicators. Third, they often originate from outside the organization or cut across multiple business areas. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. For example, a change in global data protection laws may affect legal, IT, marketing, and HR simultaneously. Because of this, emerging risks can easily fall through governance cracks if no one is looking holistically. Fourth, they are dynamic, meaning they can grow quickly, evolve rapidly, or take on new forms with little warning. A minor third-party software vulnerability might evolve into a major supply chain attack if not detected early. Finally, emerging risks do not lend themselves to one-time treatment. They require constant monitoring, reevaluation, and adjustment. Static controls may become obsolete before they're fully implemented. This means agility is essential, and governance must be prepared to shift approaches frequently. Environmental scanning is the proactive and structured process of observing external trends to detect potential threats early. This is not a one-time research activity. It's a continuous practice that should be embedded into your organization's risk monitoring framework. Effective environmental scanning includes monitoring global news, geopolitical updates, regulatory bulletins, analyst forecasts, cybersecurity threat feeds, and even social trends. For example, tracking discussions on the regulatory treatment of AI in multiple jurisdictions could uncover a future compliance burden. Internal teams such as compliance, legal, information security, and enterprise risk management should all contribute to the scanning process. However, external engagement is equally important. Participating in industry groups, professional associations like ISACA, and strategic think tanks allows organizations to benefit from collective intelligence. This includes learning from others' near misses or emerging best practices. Environmental scanning becomes more valuable when it is turned into structured outputs, such as a horizon scanning report or a trend alert dashboard. These help decision makers see weak signals and assess where threats might be forming before they hit the organization. On the CRISC exam, questions will often ask how to spot a risk that is not yet listed. The right answer will emphasize environmental awareness over control finality. You are not expected to solve the risk in those cases, but you are expected to know how to spot it early and bring it into discussion. While many emerging risks originate from external change, some are first detected through internal activity, often in subtle ways. Unusual system behaviors, sudden increases in user complaints, or recurring support tickets may signal a deeper risk forming in the background. Similarly, internal audit observations, control anomalies, or operational near misses may all reflect underlying patterns that suggest new exposures. One example might be a consistent breakdown in data labeling processes across business units. While not immediately critical, it could point to an emerging data governance gap. Organizations that successfully manage emerging risks tend to support a culture where employees are encouraged to share these signals. This includes establishing clear upward reporting paths, anonymous feedback mechanisms, and periodic reflection sessions to review operational anomalies. It also includes training teams to recognize early indicators of risk, even when those indicators seem minor or ambiguous. On the exam, questions about weak signals or near misses will reward answers that promote transparency, collaboration, and early communication, not silence or delay. Assessing emerging risks is more art than science because the lack of data makes statistical models ineffective. This is where scenario analysis becomes critical. Scenario analysis allows teams to imagine plausible futures and work backward to understand risk implications. This can include best case, worst case, and most likely outlooks, each tied to potential business impact. Cross-functional collaboration is essential during assessment. Risk managers must bring together legal, technical, operational, and business subject matter experts to think creatively and broadly. For example, a new regulation might not directly impact product development, but could disrupt partner relationships and delay go-to-market strategies. Instead of forcing numeric scores, it is better to document the range of uncertainty and focus on transparency. If you are honest about what you don't know, others in the governance chain can make informed decisions about monitoring and response. In CRISC questions, avoid answers that pretend precision exists when it does not. Good answers reflect informed judgment, cross-disciplinary input, and scenario-based reasoning. Governance plays a foundational role in managing emerging risk because these risks often fall outside the standard organizational structure. Responsibility for monitoring should be assigned to enterprise risk functions, strategy groups, or specially designated emerging risk committees. These groups should maintain visibility into long-term threats and have the authority to escalate risks before they materialize. Governance must also define how often risks are reviewed, how information is documented, and what signals trigger escalation. For instance, the sudden appearance of a new data privacy bill or a critical vulnerability in a widely used library may warrant emergency attention. Boards and senior executives should be briefed regularly on key emerging risk themes. One effective approach is to use a watch list that ranks emerging risks by likelihood and estimated impact, with space for qualitative commentary. On the exam, when you see phrases like, "The board was unaware of rising threats," it signals a gap in governance linkage. Correct answers, we usually assign monitoring to a strategic group and emphasize structure, cadence, and escalation paths. Responding to emerging risks requires adaptive strategies that reflect their volatility. Instead of jumping straight to controls, organizations often start with analysis and observation. For example, a company might monitor how competitors are responding to artificial intelligence risks before deciding on its own position. Pilot controls, like small-scope access restrictions or temporary data handling procedures, can offer mitigation without overcommitting. Building trigger points into the response plan allows the organization to act quickly if conditions escalate. Flexible frameworks like incident simulations, scenario war games, or resilience testing allow risk teams to practice response without locking in decisions. This is especially useful in highly regulated or innovative industries. On the exam, questions about how to respond to unfamiliar threats should reward patience, readiness, and scalable solutions, not immediate controlled deployment unless urgency is clear. Culture is a critical but often overlooked factor in emerging risk success. Organizations that do well in this area tend to support transparency, curiosity, and agility across all teams. They provide incentives for staff to report anomalies, ask questions about new technologies, and surface strategic concerns, even if incomplete. Leaders use scenario-based communication to explain why emerging risks matter and how everyone contributes. They avoid fear-based messaging, which often leads to resistance or denial. Instead, they highlight agility, adaptation, and informed risk-taking as strengths. Training helps staff understand how emerging risks differ from traditional ones and where to send ideas or concerns. On the exam, good answers will often include cross-functional dialogue, open reporting, and cultural enablers that support long-term vigilance. Emerging risk is closely tied to innovation. Every new initiative, whether a product, platform, partnership, or technology rollout, carries both risk and opportunity. Organizations that fail to align emerging risk monitoring with innovation cycles risk allowing exciting ideas to move forward without governance support. That can lead to unintended consequences like compliance gaps, reputational harm, or unplanned costs. To address this, emerging risk assessments should be built into project gating processes and investment committee reviews. This includes evaluating how new ideas might intersect with legal, security, and operational risk. The key message is that emerging risk is not a reason to slow down innovation. It is a way to support it responsibly. In CRISC scenarios, look for cues that suggest innovation occurred without appropriate risk input. Those scenarios usually test whether you can balance speed with oversight. On the CRISC exam, emerging risk questions are rarely about known frameworks. They test your ability to think broadly and anticipate breakdowns. If the scenario describes a major business disruption caused by a risk not listed in the register, the correct answer likely involves horizon scanning or culture gaps. If no control exists, you are not expected to solve it instantly, but you must recognize the problem and elevate it. When asked who should be informed about new threats, senior risk committees or the board are almost always the right choice. If assessing risk, choose scenario analysis, environmental scanning, or SME consultation. Ultimately, strong answers reflect vigilance, readiness to learn, willingness to escalate, and a culture that expects the unexpected. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com.